asked her name as a joke. The laughter from the officers' table rolled through the steel, gray air of the naval hangar, bouncing off the cold ribs of the ceiling. The Admiral's voice carried a lazy confidence, the kind of tone men used when they were certain they held the power in the room. "Call sign, Lieutenant," he'd said, tilting his cap back, the corners of his mouth curled with amusement. She looked up, her eyes steady. They weren't defiant, not even proud, just impossibly calm, like the surface of deep, untouchable water. "Iron Widow," she said. The laughter stuttered. Something about the way she said it, without hesitation, without the faintest flicker of irony, cut through the air. The Admiral's smirk faltered, as though the sound of that name had reached an older, buried memory. His hand, still resting on his cup of coffee, trembled slightly. He had heard that name before. Everyone in the Navy had. But not here, not from her. She stood there in her plain duty uniform, her posture too quiet for someone carrying a storm inside. The left sleeve of her jacket was neatly pinned and empty, her arm lost somewhere no one ever dared to mention aloud. The ribbons on her chest were modest, the kind issued to those who'd done too much and spoken too little. And in that moment, as the hangar filled with a silence so thick it could have drowned the engines outside, the Admiral realized what he had done. He had just asked her, the Iron Widow. Only a few in the room understood. Most didn't. They just stared, watching color drain from the Admiral's face, as though the ghost of every mission gone wrong had just walked in wearing a uniform that no longer fit perfectly. Outside, the cold wind howled through the open doors, tugging at the flags. Inside, she remained motionless. A quiet mountain amid trembling leaves. He tried to recover. "That's quite a name," he murmured, voice thinner now, his authority shrinking with each word. "How'd you earn it?" Her gaze drifted, not to him, but somewhere beyond him, to the sea visible through the hangar doors, steel, blue under the dying sun. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence between them carried its own story. The Iron Widow's story began years before that day, deep in the black water of the Arabian Sea. She had been one of them, one of the SEAL's best combat divers, small in frame but ruthless in precision. Her call sign then had been Sparrow, given by her late husband, a SEAL commander killed on a mission that never made it into the reports. Officially, it had never happened. Unofficially, she had watched it happen through her visor, helpless, her comms filled with his final breath. The next day, she didn't speak, not for weeks, not through debriefings, not through condolences. She returned to training, refusing every transfer, every counseling offer. She went back into the water again and again, each dive colder, longer, until her skin looked like porcelain and her silence felt like armor. Her team used to say she could stay under longer than anyone else. The ocean's her grief. One of them whispered once, "She just keeps breathing it in." Then came the operation that took her arm, a classified rescue gone sideways on foreign soil. Her team was ambushed. She dragged 2 wounded men across half a mile of burning sand, while radioing for extraction with her teeth clenched around a detonator wire. When the helicopter finally lifted off, she'd been the last one standing on the field, bleeding, half her body scorched, one hand still gripping the dog tags of the man who never came home. When command learned the scale of what she had done, 3 lives saved, 1 team recovered, enemy lines breached. They tried to pin a medal on her. She refused. She didn't need another piece of metal. She already wore one on her chest, the one she'd found in the wreckage of her husband's last mission. Iron Widow, the name came from her unit's whisper, a reverence wrapped in fear, a woman who'd lost everything but her will to serve. The ghost who still showed up at dawn, whose silence could quiet a whole briefing room. And now, years later, she stood in front of an admiral who had once signed the order that pulled her husband's team off their extraction route, an order that had cost every man in that unit his life. He had probably forgotten her, but she had not forgotten him. The Admiral shifted in his chair, feeling the old weight of his past decisions pressing on his chest like unseen hands. "Iron Widow," he repeated softly, the words tasting like rust. "I didn't realize—" "No, sir," she interrupted, voice low but steady. "You didn't." Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was worse. It was factual, and somehow that made it unbearable. Around them, the officers fell into uneasy stillness. They sensed the shift, the invisible battlefield forming between two people who had both survived the same war, but in different ways, one through command, one through consequence. The Admiral looked down, his eyes unfocused. He saw flashes of faces young men he'd sent into the fire because of numbers, politics, necessity. He saw the reports, the medals, the folded flags, and now, standing before him, the widow of one of those flags. He opened his mouth, but she spoke again. "You wanted my call sign, sir. Now you have it." Her words fell like stones into deep water. No anger, no accusation, just truth echoing down the hall of his memory. He tried to speak, but his voice failed. His breathing quickened. The room tilted. The coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Someone moved toward him, but he raised a trembling hand. His eyes, wide and wet, remained fixed on her. "I remember," he whispered. Then his knees buckled. The officers rushed to him, but the Iron Widow did not move. She stood there, her expression unreadable, her posture unyielding. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, no triumph, only quiet, weary understanding. When the medics arrived, she stepped back, letting them through. One of the younger sailors, barely 20, freckles still across his nose, looked up at her and swallowed hard. "Ma'am, are you Iron Widow?" She didn't answer. She simply turned and walked out of the hangar, the echo of her boots sharp against the concrete. The wind caught the end of her sleeve, the empty fabric fluttering like a ghost's whisper. Outside, the world smelled of salt and jet fuel. The sun had almost vanished, leaving the sea a dark sheet of glass. She stopped at the edge of the pier, closing her eyes for a moment. The cold air filled her lungs. For years, she had carried the weight of silence like armor, but now, for the first time, that silence felt like peace. Inside the hangar, the Admiral was being lifted onto a stretcher. His face had lost its color, his hand clutching at his chest, not from a heart attack alone, but from the sudden collision of guilt and recognition. He had once told a room full of young officers that wars are fought by soldiers, but remembered by survivors. Now, watching her silhouette disappear into the horizon, he finally understood what that meant. The story of Iron Widow spread quickly through the base. Some said the Admiral had fainted. Others said she'd cursed him with just a look. But those who had seen her that day, really seen her, knew the truth. She hadn't wanted vengeance. She wanted acknowledgement. Just once. For someone in power to remember that the cost of their decisions had names, faces, and voices that chose silence over bitterness. Days later, an official memo circulated quietly among command circles, a commendation for exemplary valor, resilience, and service beyond recognition. It bore no name, just a call sign, Iron Widow. On the bottom corner of the document, in faint handwriting added later, someone had written, "She still serves." Weeks passed. The Admiral recovered, though he was never quite the same. He stopped laughing in briefings, stopped cutting jokes about rank or call signs. He began visiting the memorial wall every morning, tracing his fingers over names that no one else remembered. And sometimes, when the base was quiet and the sea fog rolled in, sailors swore they saw her standing there too, just a lone figure at dawn, head bowed, the hem of her sleeve stirring gently in wind. There were no words between them. There didn't need to be, because some wars don't end in the field. They end in the silence between a question and an answer. She had carried her grief like a weapon and her silence like a flag. Honor doesn't need to be loud. she had once told a young recruit during training, the only advice she ever gave. "It just needs to survive the noise." Those words lived on long after she was gone. The new generation of sailors began painting that phrase on their helmets, carving it on locker doors, repeating it before missions. Honor doesn't need to be loud. And somewhere, in a coastal town where the gulls cried over the gray sea, a woman with one arm still ran along the shoreline every morning, her dog tags clinking softly with each step. She never looked back at the base, but sometimes she paused, staring out across the water where it had all begun. The ocean still smelled the same salt, metal, and memory, but now, for the first time in years, it no longer felt like grief. It felt like home, because true warriors don't seek revenge, they seek peace, and sometimes peace comes only when the powerful remember the names of those who carried the burden of their silence. And so, the legend of Iron Widow became something more than a call sign. It became a reminder whispered through every corridor, every hangar, every sea-bound heart in uniform. Respect the quiet ones. They are the ones who already paid the price, and though she never returned to duty, the shadow of her story did. Whenever new officers gathered and laughter rose in rooms where arrogance once ruled, someone would lower their voice and murmur her name. The laughter would fade, replaced by a respectful silence like the sea itself, bowing to a ghost it could never drown. She was gone, but she was everywhere. And for those who'd seen her walk out that day, the day an admiral's arrogance collapsed under the weight of her truth, they would never forget how power shifted without a single shout.